So this is the understitching of the neckline, and this is after you sew your neckline at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. You want to go back in and understitch it when you're done. And kind of with the other scenarios where you're understitching, I usually like to go in and just check and make sure that my understitching is laying towards the correct layer. And in this case, it should be lying, the seam allowance should be lying towards the inner layer of the back lining. The next step is to attach your vest front pieces that you've sewn, where you've sewn the lining and the facings and the fronts together, and you're going to attach those at the shoulder of the lining pieces that you just attached at the neckline. So you just want to go in and sew the shoulder seams at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Okay, so once your pieces are attached, I'm going to show you here what they should look like. So this is just the front piece again. This is the other side. And this is the lining. So I'm just showing you what you should be attaching. And so in this piece you can see where the shoulder seams have been attached, and you can see how it should lie once you're done sewing that piece. Okay, and you see that your armholes are still open. So you want to go, for the next step, you want to sew the armhole seams at a 1/4 inch, and you want to understitch towards the inside lining when you're done. So here I'm just sewing the other shoulder seam piece onto the garment, and just after that I'm going to show you what your garment should look like up into that point. And so this is the same shoulder seam you're going to sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance, just like you've done the previous one. Okay, so what I'm doing here is just showing you what your sample should look like up into this point, where all your pieces should pretty much be attached. So your lining piece in the back, and then your vest front pieces should all be attached now if you've sewn at the shoulder seam. So I'll try to give you a visual of what your sample should look like up into this point. And so I'm just showing you the inside, and then you can see that the armholes aren't sewn yet, nor the side seams, but you should be okay up into this point to get ready to do those steps. So here I'm preparing to sew the armholes. So I've turned the vest inside out so that the right sides are together. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew the armhole seams using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then I'm going to understitch them towards the inside layer of the vest once I'm done. Okay, so now that I'm done sewing the armhole, I'm going to go back in, and this is where I'm starting my understitching. What I find is probably the best way to understitch is when you're starting, you're going to start from each side of the armhole. So there's a back armhole and the front armhole. And the way that the fabric tends to behave at this point, it's easier to sew the understitching starting from the back up into the shoulder. And then you can also do the front and go up to the shoulder with the understitching, or vice versa. You can start at the front and then do the back. It's just difficult to go all the way around with the understitching at that point. So here you'll see that I'm starting, I think I did the front first for understitching, and then I'm going to start from the back and do the understitching. Okay, so now your armholes should be sewn together and understitched. So I'm just showing you at this point what those should look like once they are finished. Your side seams are still open, your hem lines are still open, but now your armholes are taken care of. And so you see in your back where your hemline is still not attached. So that's going to be the next step, is to join the bottom hemlines. And so eventually the only thing that is still open will be your side seams.